Okay, we know there's Islamophobia, we know there's racism, we know that 50% of the Muslim community live in poverty. We know about all of this.
I mean, it's quite a remarkable stat. I mean, I think you quoted towards the beginning of the report that like 40% of 18 to 24-year-olds aren't drinking at all at the moment. You know, apparently, you know, that's really significant. So it's almost unbelievable, actually.
If the cost of alcohol abuse is almost 6 billion, and we need 4.5 billion to help get the NHS back on its feet, we can make savings that we can then reinvest in the NHS and help all of us get the high quality access to healthcare that we all deserve. What if you want to socialize with friends or family? This is particularly interesting also for families with young children, and you don't want to go to a pub or a restaurant where A, you have to pay, and B, it's centered around alcohol. We say that faith communities already have a lot of experience with abstinence, and they have a lot of experience of creating social spaces that are not centered around alcohol. Can we work with them? Can we work with schools and universities? Can we put them in touch with community-led organizations, with mosques, with churches? And can we learn from each other, and can we work together?
Well, Dr. Jennifer Eggert, thank you so much for joining me for this In Good Faith podcast. You are the Director of Policy and Research at Equi. Tell us a little bit about Equi. What is Equi?
So Equi is a think tank that aims to draw on British Muslim community insight to help shape national policies that benefit everyone in this country. So we start with British Muslim communities, but we don't stop there. We conduct research, write up reports that include policy recommendations, and then we take these reports with the policy recommendations to policymakers in general and specifically government. Now, we are a Muslim-led think tank. The one constant in our work is that we always go back to British Muslim communities. We look at what communities are doing on an everyday basis to improve everyone's life in this country. But our focus is really much broader than that. So our ultimate aim is to create a more fair, just and prosperous society for everyone in this country. And we have a specific focus on the domestic context in the UK. So there you have other Muslim-led think tanks in this country that predominantly work on the Middle East, South Asia, other contexts outside of the UK. Equi's work is different. We specifically focus on what is happening here. And another factor that sets our work probably a bit apart from a lot of other work that is happening in the British Muslim civil society space is that our target audience is very clearly government. So a lot of other British Muslim community organizations, they work with, it's in the name, right? They focus on communities, and there is a lot in our reports that is going to benefit communities, and we keep on getting that feedback from civil society and community organizations, but our primary target audience is government.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a really useful introduction. And actually, I think, yes, what does mark Equi out in its ambition is the fact that it has this kind of universal society-wide approach, even though it is drawing primarily, or at least as a starting point, on the experiences of a particular faith community. Why that particular approach? I mean, some may criticize from within the community and say, well, actually, we have a lot of our own issues on our concerns, and we need to actually be focused on what we need as a community rather than necessarily speaking about things that concern wider society. This is a community under a lot of pressure. What would your response be to that?
I would respond two things. First of all, it's not an either or. And something that is really important to the work that Equi are doing is that we recognize that fundamentally, despite all the difference that we may have, and there are differences, and it's we're not here to dismiss these or disregard them, but fundamentally, what do we want? we all want a good life. We want good housing. We want good schools for our children. We want good work, good working conditions, basically a good life. And that's the same for everyone in this country, I would argue, fundamentally, be it Muslims or anyone else, really. So that's the first one thing I would say. The other thing I would say is that there is already, there are a lot of organizations that focus on the issues that the Muslim community specifically is facing. There's a lot of that out there. But the people who conceived of the idea of Equi, they identified a gap within this British Muslim civil society space. They saw that a lot of work is done that focuses on how can we improve conditions for a Muslim community, specifically, exclusively, maybe. But then there's also a lot of work that focuses on the issues. There's a lot of focuses. I mean, there's grievances, there's challenges, there are a lot of issues. Again, I'm not here, and Equi is not here to diminish any of that. But the reality is that there's also a lot of work that's already being done in this space. What was identified as missing is very concrete and constructive solutions for how can we change this. So yes, okay, we know there's Islamophobia, we know there's racism, we know that 50% of the Muslim community live in poverty. We know about all of this. But what can we do? What can we change? And also, how can we get away from a mindset where we see ourselves as lacking in the first place? How can we actually shed a light on all the really important and good work that our communities are doing every day? And that's work that's often not recognized. That's work that just happens out there, and it doesn't make big headlines because, let's be frank, what does the media want? Usually it's negative stories. So we are trying to shift this, and we're trying to provide a narrative of hope and of change for everyone, for Muslims, but for the rest of society as well.
A very praiseworthy attempt, and it's quite new, right? So Equi's only started, what is it, a couple of years now, or just over a year? How long has it been?
So the Equi launch was in September last year. So
okay,
it's
so
been a
very
bit.
new. Yeah.
It's been a bit more than a year. We just recently celebrated our first year anniversary at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool. We hosted an Equi reception, which was attended by the Home Secretary, by the Secretary of Health, and a number of other MPs, which is quite remarkable for an organization that's still so young.
Yes. So I do want to come back to actually some of the specifics around government engagement and how that whole works. I think, viewers or listeners will be really interested just to understand the mechanics of how you go from, identifying an issue to researching and writing a report, but then perhaps even most importantly, once the report is done, how does that actually translate into actual policy? So I do want to come back to that. But I did get in touch with the team specifically to discuss your most recent report, which just came out, which is titled A Teetotal Britain, Learning from Faith Communities. So this is really interesting. And I think just to give a brief sort of personal perspective on this one, because one of my own concerns in my own work is actually this issue to do with the extent to which we're able to show the universal value proposition of faith in society. So very much, I suppose, aligns with what your team is up to. And this specific issue is one that I have thought about myself. Not that I've done much about it, but when I'm thinking about examples of universal propositions or societal change that can take place or that we could positively influence, then this seems to be definitely one of those areas in terms of alcohol consumption and just more broadly, drugs and substance abuse. And it's just been so interesting to observe that in recent years, on the positive side, the fact that actually, almost quite surprisingly in a way, and maybe you can tell us more about this, that you have had this broader trend in society of reduced alcohol consumption. But I suppose the unfortunate thing about it to a certain degree is that I don't think we as a community could claim that was because of our sort of interventions or advocacy or proposals or proposition. Meaning, yes, we relatively as a faith community certainly abstain from alcohol in our own personal practice, and that has its own benefits, societal benefits, which I know you highlight in the report. But the fact that there is this wider trend going on, which doesn't seem to be a strongly faith connected trend, more broadly, but there's other factors there, but one which we could have been, but certainly can still now be, important contributors to. So anyway, that was just one of the issues that personally so when I saw this report, I just thought, okay, that connected with a particular strand of thinking, which is why I probably got in touch to discuss this one, and maybe not previously to discuss other ones. Although there's other interesting reports that you guys have been doing in your first year. Anyway, so that was just to give at least viewers and listeners, and even yourself, just a bit of background context to my own kind of interest in this. But maybe why don't you tell us? Oh, yeah, go for it. Yeah, sure.
Sorry,
sure. Yeah, of course.
I just thought that was really interesting what you just said. I find it quite intriguing that you say that this report and this topic in particular stood out to you, because my personal impression has actually been that this is a particularly difficult topic to discuss. So our more recent reports on, for example, the British Muslim contributions, British Muslim responses to youth violence, where we highlighted how British Muslim youth clubs and mosques, how they help prevent and counter young people getting caught up in violence and in crime. That was much, in terms of the reception, it was much more enthusiastically received by the media, including the mainstream media. And with this topic, I felt a bit like, there definitely is a trend in terms of declining alcohol consumption. This is something that is being covered in the media. If you literally just search on Google, you find lots of reports, and there is other people who write about it. But what still seems to bit of and I'm not sure if I want to call it a taboo, but it's a bit of an area where we don't go, is to bring faith into that. And maybe particularly as Muslims, because then immediately you're worried about people accusing you of wanting to Islamicize Britain and take people's beer away. And this is really not what the report is about. So maybe I can return the question to you. Like, why do you feel that this topic in particular is one where we as Muslims can contribute to the society?
No, it's just as I said, it's just a good example. It's just given that recent trend, because I think that's quite remarkable. Actually, let's put it this way: we're not used to seeing significant social or cultural changes in Britain that are sort of taking hold in the wider population that we would say typically, whose moral direction we would typically agree with. That's quite unusual, right? Like, normally we might say that the direction of wider society in many respects sometimes feels that it goes against the kind of values and ethics that we hold.
Not sure I agree with that, to be honest.
Right,
and I think quite a few of our reports show the opposite. So again, to go back to the youth violence report that I just mentioned, we, from what I know, this was one of the very few, if not the first reports that looked at specifically what do faith-led community initiatives contribute to the prevention of youth violence. But there is a lot of literature, a lot of knowledge on community-led and localized approaches to prevention in that space. So this was something where, again, a broader debate was happening, or is happening in society. And this is a broader trend that we say, if we want to prevent youth violence effectively, then we need to go to the grassroots, and we need to go to the community, and we need to involve local actors. And just the little bit that was missing from these broader discussions, and that we as Equi brought in, was to say, yes, and faith actors and faith communities are part of these civil society initiatives. And I feel we're doing exactly the same with the alcohol report. So it's really interesting that you feel that there's a real difference there.
No. No. I think we're agreed. Actually, I think maybe I wasn't clear, but all I meant to say is that nowadays, when we just think about the broader societal trends, typically there's a lot of doom and gloom at the moment, right? In terms of increasing loneliness, increasing mental health difficulties, increased anxiety, people being, much more sort of all of the negative effects of technology, all of the negative effects of AI, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just saying that broadly speaking, if you just look at, I mean, I don't want to say natural trends, but whatever the trends are that are taking place, they're typically quite negative. So this is just one of those things where, I mean, it's quite a remarkable stat. I mean, I think you quoted towards the beginning of the report that like 40% of 18 to 24-year-olds aren't drinking at all at the moment, apparently. And, that's really significant. So it's almost unbelievable, actually. When you think, most people think about that's obviously half of that age group is university, undergraduate sort of going, age. And the idea that 4 out of 10 are not drinking at all certainly marks a significant contrast to my experience of, university life. But anyway, look, so why don't we get into the report? So what prompted you actually or the team to kind of take this up as an issue?
Well, I guess it goes a bit back to what you just mentioned, that we identified as a key issue that affects society as a whole. So again, going back to this mission of Equi to draw on what is happening in British Muslim communities, but then produce policy recommendations that that are beneficial or that are aimed to benefit everyone in society. So we identified this as one of a number of other policy issues, such as the ones that we've written previous reports on. And then again, also what I've just mentioned was about bringing in something new, right? Obviously, as I said, there is already an ongoing debate. There are quite a few actors in the space. There is several alcohol awareness charities that are involved. That are the NHS contributes to the debate, academic institutes, universities, and so on. But what is often missing from the debate is a specific focus on faith. So that's what we as Equi, with the mission that we have, thought would be interesting to bring into this debate and build on previous discussions by all of these other actors.
With respect to that specifically, then, what would you say were the key sort of findings? What are the highlights then, which represent these sort of novel, say, contributions to this discussion?
Yeah, so what was really interesting, the idea of the report is really to spark a national conversation. And it's really about getting people to reimagine the UK's relationship with alcohol in public space, and then bring in the experiences of, on the one hand, young people. We've mentioned Gen Z. What do you say, Gen Z in the UK?
Yeah, Gen Z. I think everyone says Gen Z.
Gen Z universally. So to look at what is happening there amongst members of Gen Z, but also faith communities who abstain and who've done so for a long time. So there's already established practices that perhaps we, as the broader society, can draw on in order to then propose policy solutions that reduce harm, that bring communities together, and that help improve public health and well-being for everyone in this country. So in terms of the key messages, you already mentioned some of the numbers. So first of all, it's very clear if we look at the numbers that the drinking culture in the UK is changing. Alcohol consumption has declined significantly in the last 10 years or so, especially amongst young people. You've already mentioned the percentage. So it's just under 40% of Gen Z that report to drink. At the same time, the harm that is caused by alcohol misuse remains really high. So the cost for that that we have included in the report is 40 billion a year. And that includes almost 60 million pounds of cost to the NHS. And then, of course, these are just the numbers, right? They're very big numbers, so they're very impressive. But at the same time, I find it's really important not to forget that we're not just speaking about numbers. We're not just speaking about financial costs. We are speaking about people's lives. And in terms of lives lost every year due to alcohol misuse, the number there is 25,000 every single year. 25,000 people, 25,000 moms, dads, brothers, sisters, sons, daughters, and so on, just gone. So that was the starting point. That's where we started the research. And then again, in line with the general Equi approach of looking for inspiration in British Muslim communities, we then looked for practices of faith communities where we were hoping to find practical lessons. And we found that the abstinence in faith communities, and it includes Muslims, but obviously also other faith communities. There are Sikh communities that don't drink. There are Christian communities that don't drink. And we found that the cost saving due to faith-based abstinence in the UK in total is over 1.6 billion a year. Again, really impressive number.
Could I just get you to pause there, just with these numbers. So when we talk about the 40 billion, the overall kind of cost earlier, as well as the this 1.6 billion that is specifically saved as a result of Muslim community abstinence, like how are people might just sometimes wonder when figures are banded around, like how are these figures kind of calculated in the first place, and broadly speaking, like what are the key parts of the or the key things that compose these particular figures?
Yeah, so I can go into the numbers with you and we can talk them through as much as you can bear, because to be honest, me I'm happy to do it. I'm just warning you, even for me as a complete nerd, I mean, research is that's my daily job, right? This is extremely boring, but I'm happy to do it. We can go through it step by step. I went through the report and I tried to break it all down into foolproof steps, and foolproof not because of you or any of the listeners, but for me. So we can absolutely do that.
You won't get into too much detail, but just to give viewers like just a broad idea of what's the key parts of these numbers. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I do that. Let me make a general point before we go into the details, though. And that just in general, when it comes to, and this is not just a point that's specific to alcohol misuse, but generally when it comes to public policy issues of this kind, something that we often encounter during the work on our reports at Equi, it's often quite difficult to get the accurate numbers. So the data is often either it doesn't exist or it's very patchy. You have a little bit of data here, a little bit of data there. So this is also what we did for this report. Sometimes you have data that's really insightful, but you only have it for Wales and Scotland, which is great. It's a starting point. But then it's a matter of putting the pieces of the puzzle together and checking, do we maybe have this data for the other home countries as well? And sometimes we don't. And then we come up with an estimate based on the numbers of the other parts of the country. What makes this all even more tricky is that faith is often missing from the equation. So, and this happened here during the research for the alcohol report as well.
You mean in terms of at the data collection end, essentially?
In terms of publicly available open source data.
Yeah.
For example, we used NHS data, or we used data from existing data sets, and ethnicity is often in there, but faith is often missing. And this is a reflection of a broader issue, broader trend of an appreciation of the role of race and ethnicity, but then faith is something, it's still a bit of a taboo sometimes, something that people are a bit suspicious of, or they don't really understand. They don't really understand how it can add to the analysis. But then it's a really important point, because if we just go by ethnicity, and we use that as a proxy indicator for faith, then okay, we know that 60% of the Muslims in the UK are of originally South Asian heritage. But it means that 40% are not. And it also means if we then don't account for this difference between the faith and the ethnicity data, it would mean that I, as a white Muslim woman, I just don't feature. And it's a similar issue for lots of Black Muslims. who are also often in debates here in the UK about Muslims, they often just don't
Excluded.
their experience. Yeah, they're excluded.
Mm.
So that's a general issue here. In terms of how we approach the data collection specifically for the alcohol report, as we started, as I mentioned just now, we used government data by charities that are working in the area of alcohol awareness more generally. So, for example, we cite the British Liver Trust, the Institute for Alcohol Studies, and then there are also some data sets available by academic institutes. So that's the general big picture. Now, if we want to know, so you asked about the financial cost of alcohol misuse.
Yeah, just the
40
composition
billion.
of this. Yeah, composition of the 40 or the 1.6, which is specifically saved from say Muslim abstinence.
Yeah, I can talk you through both of them. So, in terms of the point about alcohol misuse costing the UK 40 billion pounds a year, we started our calculations here with data that's provided by the Institute of Alcohol Studies from 2024, so relatively recent data. The 40 billion, it accounts for costs due to healthcare, crime, economic and social services. So it's quite a broad approach that we're taking here, right? Because obviously there are alcohol-related, alcohol-specific harms. Alcohol-specific harms would be someone dying from liver disease because they've abused alcohol for so long that the body just couldn't take it anymore. You also have alcohol-related harms, which would be included in this number. And this accounts for example, higher levels of violence. We know, for example, that alcohol is a contributing factor in many domestic violence cases, especially those targeting women. So this is also included in this number. So again, I mentioned already that sometimes you have data for some of the home nations and not others. In this case, the data was available for each of the home nations, but it was separate data, so we added it all together. And the total for all the home nations, the 4 home nations, was just over 39 billion. What we then did is we added to this the cost of premature death caused by alcohol. Yeah, so people who died prematurely due to alcohol abuse. The number for that is 13.5 billion. This number, I want you, it's boring, but we're going to do it. You asked for it.
Yeah.
This number came from the cost for premature death caused by smoking. So this is the numbers for premature death caused by alcohol was not available. But what we did find is the number for economic cost of premature death caused by smoking, because the number for premature death caused by smoking is not specific to smoking. We felt confident using that also to alcohol related deaths. And the way this calculation worked is that you have a financial value for each year of a life lost. We added all the totals together. So the 39 billion for the costs for healthcare, crime, economic and social services, plus these 13.5 million for premature death. But then we didn't stop there. What we did as a next step is we subtracted from the 39 billion plus 13.5 billion, we subtracted from that the total of the revenue that the country receives in taxes from alcohol products.
All right.
Right? Because if we're speaking about financial cost, then it really makes sense to highlight the negative effects, but then there is also benefits in terms of financial in terms of finances, right? From alcohol sales and tax. And that's how we came up with a number of 40 billion a year. We then also mention an estimated cost to the NHS. So that's just under 6 billion. And this was a really interesting, interesting calculation. So Again, we used existing data from a number of different organizations because there was no one figure, but we used numbers from the British Liver Trust. They had numbers available for England. We used official government report for Scotland and for Wales, and then we combined that with academic research on Northern Ireland. So this is how, right, we use different data sources to put together the pieces of this puzzle. Now, an estimated cost of the exact number is 5.89. Let's just say almost 6 million. Billion, not million. Almost 6 billion pounds cost to the NHS. This number exceeds the estimated NHS financial deficit, which is around 4.5 billion, or was around 4.5 billion in 2023-24. So here you see, again, this is lots of number. It might just go above people's heads to some extent. I can totally relate to that, right? But these numbers are significant and they are important because if the cost of alcohol abuse is almost 6 billion and we need 4.5 billion to help get the NHS back on its feet, which is another big debate, right, that we're having at the moment in public policy circles and people interested in public policy, an issue that affects Muslims and everyone else in this country. By reducing the cost due to the NHS, due to alcohol misuse, we can make savings that we can then reinvest in the NHS and help all of us get the high quality access to healthcare that we all deserve. So this is why this research is really, really important, and this is the kind of impact that we can potentially see by implementing some of the policy changes that we are recommending in the report.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Behind the numbers is some real and very important effects. Okay, so in terms of I mean, just briefly, just back to the kind of the shifting attitudes that we're seeing more broadly. I mean, what would you say accounts for the reduction in alcohol consumption amongst those who aren't necessarily doing that for faith reasons? Is it just general health awareness, or is there other factors too?
It's a couple of factors. Again, really, really interesting. I suppose, I mean, Gen Z, that's 30 to 15 years old. A lot of us are either in that age bracket or we have family members and friends who are. Probably a lot of us will be able to relate to some of the points that that I'll share with you now. So one point is wellness and fitness trends. There's just more and more awareness that alcohol abuse, excessive drinking is just not beneficial to your health. Another factor, and a more recent one, is cost of living pressures. Again, a national debate that we've had for a couple of years now that affects everyone, both Muslims and the rest of the country. Prices for everyday items are increasing for food, rent, and so on. And it's just more difficult for lots of people to justify regular spending on something that is probably a luxury. And then more generally, just shifting social norms that prioritize things like health and productivity over excess drinking. One factor that also came up in the research that I found quite interesting because it's so Gen Z is the role of social media and mobile phones, because everyone, and I mean very different to what things were like when I grew up, right? In the 90s. So everyone has a mobile phone on them now. So if you are caught drinking excessively on a night out, there's just a much higher risk of evidence of that going out for the world to see, and something that people also seem to be more aware of, and I just want to avoid potentially embarrassing online content. It's probably not the main factor. Things like wellness, changing for wellness and fitness trends in the living cost crisis are probably more important, but it's important to be aware of different, again, pieces of the puzzle that make us understand what is happening there.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably not insignificant, because obviously concern for public image amongst, especially younger people is a significant thing. So yeah, okay. Now, there's a section in the report where we talk about creating alcohol-free spaces. So with a sort of a title like that, that kind of might get some people to like you were saying right at the beginning, I think get a bit concerned that we're trying to have like some beer-free Britain or something. But in part of that section, you were talking about reimagining nightlife in Britain, and actually especially interestingly, alongside the fact that have seen over the years, like a lot of pub closures. The pub used to be kind of a hub for local community, and still is, obviously, in many parts of the country. A hub for local community kind of gathering, etc. So, in what ways can nightlife be reimagined in such a way that aligns with the benefits of abstinence, but also in such a way that encourages sort of community development?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the research that we conducted was really interesting in that regard. We already mentioned the numbers, right? 40% of young people aged 18 to 24, they report they don't drink. Actually, even amongst UK adults who say that they do drink, when questioned by a polling agency, and this is also relatively recent numbers from October last year, nearly half of them said that they had plans to stop entirely or at lose their alcohol intake. I mean, obviously, there's always an element of bias, potential bias in there. That if you ask people, do you want to reduce a habit that's potentially seen as undesirable, then of course everyone is going to say, yes, I will. But I think there is still something interesting in there. Now, in terms of public spaces, I throw a few more numbers at them, but just because I found them so intriguing.
Sure.
So we found in the report that around 15%, over 15% actually, of British towns and cities have just completely lost all their late night venues. So this is numbers that we took from the Nighttime Industries Association. So 15% of all British towns and cities that had a nightclub in 2020 just did not have any late night venues left at all. And it's probably the pandemic played a role as well, right? If we think back 2020, this is when a lot of cafes, pubs, and clubs had to close. Speaking about pubs, oh my god, mixing up all my words. The pubs. Speaking about pubs, it has been suggested by the British Beer and Pub Association that British pubs are going to close at a rate of one a day this year. There's been a lot of media attentions. I've seen this covered by quite a few media outlets in the last few months, and again said that 15,000 pubs have closed since the pandemic. Really significant number here. Now, what we did in the report is we actually included a case study of what a different night life could look like. We took an example from London, a cafe that has recently opened in London, and that doesn't serve alcohol. It's Muslim-led, but they are open until 10 p.m. every single day. They offer not just food and drinks, but also have a really strong focus on culture, music nights, board games, open mic events, but also things such as financial literacy programs, right? So even adding an educational element there and inviting people to give talks. The general manager of the cafe, it's a Kismet cafe in Whitechapel. The general manager, Nujema Softage, that we spoke to, she described the approach as coffee, conversation, and culture. And again, this is something that is designed to appeal not just to Muslims, but also non-Muslims. And when we spoke to Nujema, she told us about a recent board games event that they organized in the cafe that attracted Muslim and non-Muslim participants who really enjoyed this space, this alternative alcohol-free space that was provided by the cafe. And I can... this is the research from the report. I can share personal anecdotes with you as well. My
Sure.
family are not Muslim. They live abroad. I go and see them on a regular basis. And then it's always a matter of bringing all the family together, because finally Jennifer is in town and we get to see her once or twice a year. And then it's always a question of where do we meet with all the family. We like to meet in a restaurant. And then I suggested a Muslim-led Italian restaurant, halal, no alcohol. Before we went the first time, my uncle was a bit like, oh, what do you mean they don't serve alcohol? What do you mean Muslim-led? We went and the entire family loves it, absolutely loves it. I love it because they don't serve alcohol. There's halal meat. It's super Muslim friendly. And now when I go home and we speak about the next family reunion, it's my family who actually suggest this place. And when I don't go, but I send my daughter, I then later hear, oh, we went to this place again. So there are lots of examples of halal, alcohol-free, Muslim-led spaces that can really appeal to non-Muslim audiences. And it's just a matter of highlighting these examples, spreading awareness, and also supporting them. So this is then in the policy, we come to the policy recommendations of the report. This is one of the policy recommendations that we put forward for government and local authorities to support cafes or restaurants that choose not to serve alcohol, that choose to provide these alcohol-free environments for people who, for a variety of reasons, prefer not to socialize in an environment that's centered around alcohol.
What would that support look like? Is that different to the kind of support that they might need to provide for any kind of local business? Is there something additional that's needed?
So what we were thinking about when we looked at the research that was conducted for the report, and then we looked at the findings, we thought like, okay, how can we then translate this into policy recommendations? One approach that we thought of was that we would like to see local authorities to simplify the process for venues to obtain permits that allow for late night opening times. We would like them to introduce discounted rates, and maybe even think about offering targeted funding. So basically providing a range of different incentives for entrepreneurs that are interested in exploring offering alcohol-free spaces. And again, these entrepreneurs, they could be from within the Muslim community, but they don't have to. There are examples in London of restaurants that offer halal meat and don't serve alcohol, and they're not run by Muslim owners.
And I think what's interesting about that is it also connects to another really important theme in the country at the moment, which I think you've also done a report on, if I'm not mistaken, which is the issue of loneliness, right?
Yes.
And that's obviously a significant part of what would also be helped to be dealt with by sort of welcoming spaces which are where people feel sort of, at ease and and obviously into the evenings and what have you, when people may otherwise obviously be spending time alone at home.
Absolutely. I mean, the loneliness report, we published that just before Christmas last year. Really, really fascinating research that showed that the cost of loneliness to the UK economy is actually around £6 billion every year. And 50% of adults in the UK suffer from loneliness. So this is an endemic. This is an
50,
endemic.
50 as in 50 or 15?
50%.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Okay.
So this is...
What is it, just on that, what is the definition of loneliness there?
Oh, I don't have that ready for you.
Okay, that's fine. I know we're going to a different... Yeah, I'm just interested to understand like what that kind of what that means. So if they experience it, and maybe I suppose
Yeah.
because what's important to understand is like the frequency, the constancy
Yeah.
of that experience. Anyway, yes, that's a separate discussion. I appreciate that. That's fine. So coming back to where we were, so fine, you've talked about the nightlife, and I think definitely some examples. And
Mm.
again, just from personal reflection, I don't
Mm.
know if this is a changing trend or not, but I suppose I have been maybe, and maybe it's just I'm not aware of it, but I felt that there was actually quite a significant business opportunity in like just more teetotal bars even, or pubs, so they could still conceive of themselves as pubs and kind of tick all of the maybe traditional boxes that people would be used to in terms of a pub feel or atmosphere, but really sort of hone in on their mocktail sort of menu, let's
Yeah.
say, and
Yeah.
obviously have all these 0% type sort of options as well, of the usual drinks that people will be familiar with. But anyway,
And
yeah.
I feel this is actually really an important point that you're making there, Iqbal, because this is also a reflection of the changing nature of British Islam and British Muslim communities. So we are becoming more and more British. So on a whole range of different levels and in different areas, but this includes food and drink preferences.
Yes, yeah,
I
that's right.
mean,
Yeah.
yeah, and this is true. This is true for converts like myself, as it is for second, third, or fourth generation Muslims in this country whose parents, grandparents, great grandparents might have one day come from here, and they might have had different habits and preferences. But this is changing. This is changing, and I mean, the amount of times that I felt so alienated at Muslim organized events where the food was always and always biryani and kebab. And I love biryani and I love kebab, right? But it's not it's not everything.
Yeah.
And there's more to it. And I was so excited. And when I became a Muslim almost 25 years ago, in my hometown in Germany, big city, right? Um, the only halal restaurant that we had was a chippy, and
Hmm.
that was it. And there was nothing else. And this has changed so much in the last 25 years. And now, and this is the same, I mean, I'm speaking about Germany now, but you see similar trends here in the UK. You can now choose, do I want to go to a halal chippy? Yes, maybe I do, but maybe I want to go to a Pakistani restaurant and have that biryani because I love it so much. But I can also go to a really good Italian restaurant or a really good Thai, or so um, the landscape of what is on offer in terms of food scene, drinks, pubs, cafes, and so on. It's really changing, and it's changing because we are changing.
Yeah, absolutely. And just if you don't mind me asking, just because, especially in relation to the personal anecdote that you shared earlier. So obviously you mentioned you're a German, sort of, you were born in Germany, but you're based here in the UK now. But when you spoke about going back to the visit your family, so you mean back to Germany? That's where that Italian restaurant was, for example. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And if you ever go to Frankfurt, let me know and I'll send you the address.
People might be
Yeah,
if you want, you can share the name if you remember. Do you remember the name of the restaurant?
yeah, it's called Mama Forno.
Mama Phone. Okay, well there you go. All right, well maybe they got some extra customers off the back of this. Okay, it's
Commission. I'm gonna tell them.
yeah, you should have the 10% of proceeds to Equi to fund
Totally.
the
Yeah,
ongoing work.
my
Yeah.
position.
The yes, no, it's interesting actually, because I just reminded me of I visited Ireland earlier this year for the first time, which I really enjoyed. And obviously, the Irish, like the Germans, actually have a quite a almost, I don't know what the data says. You'll maybe correct the stereotype if the stereotype is wrong. But obviously, the reputation is like significant. Obviously, drinkers, and but I remember there was a very extremely popular Moroccan restaurant in Dublin that I went to, which didn't serve alcohol as well, and it was completely rammed. And yeah, so it's just it's if the experience is good and the quality is good, and by contrast, and I think a lot of it actually South Asian, because South Asians have obviously been at the forefront of the development of big aspects of the restaurant industry in the UK, and actually there's always felt many of them have always felt the pressure of actually, serving alcohol because of the
Yeah.
culture and in order
Yeah.
to attract customers. But actually now, exactly as you've said, if before maybe there wasn't that maybe confidence, maybe from a faith perspective or just from even a business perspective, the environment's certainly changing in a way, and maybe the confidence is also changing in a way that allows for, let's call it the best of all worlds. Yeah, interesting, very interesting developments.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And this is where our policy recommendations then come in. This is where we want local authorities to come in and support these businesses, because there is a change, there is increased confidence, because if you are from here, right, it has to do also with shifting mindset. In terms of maybe previous generation had more of that immigrant mindset of, oh, we are guests here, we are new arrivals, we want to keep a low profile. But
yes.
this is becoming more and more irrelevant in the second, third, and fourth generation, right? So there's definitely a shift there. But then in terms of practicalities, it's still relatively difficult to make, it's still a radical decision to say, no, I am actually setting up a cafe or a restaurant and we won't serve alcohol. So this is where we want local authority to come in, and we want them to support and set incentives based on the recognition that alcohol-free spaces is not just something that a lot of Muslims want, but it's a general Gen Z
people generally
trend.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. And also we give more examples in the report as well. So we also speak of women who might have been assaulted by someone who's drank too much, or it might be people who've experienced domestic violence by a drunk family member, and so on, or a recovering alcoholic. It's a really long list of people. If you actually sit down and think about it, there's often this assumption, oh, it's just the Muslims. No, it's not just the Muslims. There's a really broad societal trend that we're seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to, if you don't mind, just touch briefly, because it is, it's very significant in the Muslim conscience, especially amongst younger people, as they're entering into the workplace. And you had this whole section around, just the workplace attitudes shifting, and just obviously, I'm not saying just to kind of talk about it from the Muslim experience perspective, although that's certainly, I know, something that's always, an issue for young people who are going into work, and then they often feel up until that point they've been able to maybe stay away from alcohol fueled spaces, but in the work environment it becomes more tricky. But actually the report seems to suggest that the trends are broadly shifting there too.
In terms of attitudes, at least, it was quite interesting to see. So we're quoting a survey by Movendi that found that over 70% of workers in the UK would actually like to see alcohol-free workplace gathering. So that's we didn't go into that part of the report in much detail, right? So we're touching on a few different public spaces. Nightlife was one. We also spoke about the situation at universities and schools, because there's also a whole debate there around introducing alcohol-free events during Freshers' Weeks, for example. It's obviously significant issue in the university context. And then a third example that we brought in was the workplace. And as you mentioned, there's lots of pressure on people to join gatherings in the pub after work, something that we all know, we've all seen. And if you don't feel comfortable to join, then this can often mean that, at the very least, you're missing out on important business conversations.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay. I don't want to necessarily get into it too much right now, but just to highlight, just for people's interest, that there is also a small section in the report where you talk about the shortcomings in current policy. So you talk about the fact that the from a pricing perspective, that maybe the minimum unit pricing can go up, as well as just more actually from a labeling and marketing perspective, like that there's more sort of clarity, I suppose, that can be there. So people can explore that. But just in terms of the actual policy recommendations that you yourself make, just more broadly, are there any other particular ones that you want to highlight that we haven't necessarily touched on thus far?
There was one more around socializing in public spaces that we haven't really touched upon yet. So we've spoken about the incentives for alcohol free entrepreneurs. We've already spoken about that. There was
Yes.
another one that I also found quite interesting and that I think is worth highlighting in this debate, and that's the suggestion to support late night openings of cultural spaces.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So this is something where we actually drew inspiration from a lot of Muslim majority countries. Turkey is an example that came up in the report, where museums in the long summer nights and the hot summers, they obviously have much hotter summers in Turkey than they do here, but municipalities decided to open museums which are air conditioned, again with public health in mind, and to allow people to use these spaces and protect themselves from the extreme heat. Now, obviously, we're not going to have Turkey temperatures here for extended periods of time in the UK anytime soon, but our summers are changing and it's getting hotter here too. So can we maybe think about it? And there is late museum nights, but it's often just one night a month, or even less frequent than that. It's often very expensive. So can we make this more accessible to broader parts of the population? And can we maybe also speak about parks opening for longer? Museums as well. It doesn't have to be the entire night, but a lot of museums at the moment, they close at 4 or 5 p.m. This is very early. What if you want to socialize with friends or family? This is particularly interesting also for families with young children, and you don't want to go to a pub or a restaurant where A, you have to pay, and B, it's centered around alcohol. So
Yes,
this was
yes.
another very concrete recommendation for policymakers that we thought would be worth exploring. Other than that, there's a general recommendation here on partnerships with civil society, with community, and that includes faith communities. So if we say that faith communities already have a lot of experience with abstinence, and they have a lot of experience of creating social spaces that are not centered around alcohol, can we work with them? Can we work with schools and universities? Can we put them in touch with community-led organizations, with mosques, with churches? And can we learn from each other? And can we work together? Because ultimately we have the same aim in mind, and that's for everyone to be safe and to be well and to be healthy and to live a good life.
Perfect. Okay, no, thank you so much. And I think we'll probably leave it there with the specifics of the the report itself, and I'll definitely link it so if people can check it out and check out the website more broadly. To finish off, though, I do want to now go back to kind of where we were at the beginning, and I'll just ask a few questions about what happens next. Essentially, once a report like this has been done and all the hard work is and I think people. And I'm sure you would want people to know or not to underestimate, the amount of effort that goes into a piece of work like this, even though if it's primarily kind of, what's like, say, secondary research, but compiling all of the different things out there. I know there's almost 100 citations in the report and a long bibliography. And, there were 3 sort of contributors, who you were overseeing for this. So it's no small piece of work. But once all of this is done, obviously the concern for yourself primarily, but also people sometimes are skeptical about the fact that, well, what's the point of the research reports? No one reads them anyway. So how do you make sure that these things get read, get seen, and action actually gets taken?
Yeah, really good question. This is a point that is really, really important to Equi. So we definitely want our research to be read, and we definitely want, because as I mentioned in the beginning, ultimately the aim is policy change. We want things to change for the better for everyone in this country. So in order for that to happen, we need people to be able to use the work. The policy recommendations are a first step. Right. You'll also notice that the reports, we really put a lot of effort into making sure that they are read in an accessible style. And then there is, of course, all the policy engagement and advocacy work that comes after a report is published. This includes media and comms work, like for example, what we're doing here now, this is an example, right? We speak with media, we speak with media makers, including people who are active on social media, who do podcasts, to try and break down the findings of the report and get the message across. We also engage with policymakers directly. So we disseminate the reports and the findings, both as a report as such, but then we often also write briefings that summarize the key points, and we share them with policymakers that we work with. We tend to get quite good positive feedback. So we do know that people are aware of our work. We know that they engage with it. We know that they do read the reports. We have been invited for briefings. I mentioned the Equi reception that took place in Liverpool in September, where we had keynote speeches by both the Home Secretary and the Secretary for Health. So there is regular engagement. Now the policy change, that is the ultimate goal in this picture. That's obviously a long haul game. Legislative change is obviously something that doesn't happen overnight, but on the short and mid-term, what we can do and what we focus on is to make a contribution to public policy debates, that some of these key debates that we've been discussing since the beginning of the conversation. So we make our contribution, we shape debates, we engage with policymakers and key stakeholders, and we disseminate our research, and we disseminate evidence-based approaches. That's a key point here as well. It's about not just making proposals. Anyone can do that. Anyone can just think up an idea that they might that they think might work. But what is key to our work is that these are evidence-based approaches that are based on statistics, all the number crunching that I brought you with at the beginning of the conversation, but then also stories. Like the case studies that we have in the report. I mentioned, for example, the cafe in London, Kismet Cafe. That's really how we approach the engagement part of our work, and with the hope to see better outcomes for Muslims and really everyone else in the UK.
Sure. So when you say, people often hear this thing around, engaging with policymakers, but then they're wondering, like, who exactly are we talking about here? So just like a report like this one, for example, like, who would you have been sending this report to that you would hope, would be starting to pay attention as an important part of that policy process? Who exactly are we talking about when we talk about these policymakers?
So when we talk about policymakers, in the first instance, we speak about government, because these are the people that at the moment can make change, right? But we're also speaking about policymakers more broadly. So we're also speaking about elected MPs that might not currently be part of the government, but that are also hold their weight in the political space. So we have a whole network of MPs, of policymakers, of members of government that we engage with and that we share our research with, that we get, as I mentioned, we get feedback from. So this is the short and midterm work, and then in the long term, we hope to see that policy change.
So two other kind of stakeholders came to mind, and then just maybe you could speak to that as well, which is obviously, especially for this report, a lot of the important recommendations were down to local authorities. So what does local authority engagement look like for you? That's different to direct government engagement.
Yeah, we engage with local government as well. Our primary target group is national government, but I mean, there is in pretty much every of these reports, it becomes obvious fairly quick that the findings are of relevance to broader groups of people. And I mentioned, for example, in the beginning when we first spoke about who is the primary target audience for Equi. I mentioned government, but then we also spoke about the fact that even though communities are not our main target group, there is a lot to learn for communities in our reports. And this is also feedback that we're getting from civil society groups, including Muslim-led ones, who are really excited about our work, are really happy to have really high quality, solidly researched publications that are available for free on the website that they can go to. And we've had organizations feedback to us that they use these to organize awareness raising events in their local communities. So there's really, if I say that the main target audience is national government, that doesn't mean that there is no benefit in our work for all these other groups.
Of course, of course. And would you be sharing your findings with, for example, like other charities and advocacy groups that are already specifically working on this particular issue?
Yes, absolutely. So we launched this report last week, and we did send it out to our MP contacts, but we also send out tailored messages to a lot of the alcohol awareness charities that are active in this space. Alcohol awareness charities that we are citing in our report. And again, we have received very positive and encouraging feedback because they see that we are working towards the same objectives, but what Equi is adding that they themselves would struggle to add in the same way is this face perspective. So this is obviously something that is particularly powerful coming from a Muslim-led organization with the resources and the insights and the connection that Equi has. Also the relations to the communities. A lot of charities are really interested in that. And not just charities. We hear the same also from other agencies, NHS and so on. They're really interested in having these connections, but they don't have these links. There's often an issue of trust, of access. This is something that we as Equi can provide, and where we then can come in as a sort of bridge builder or translator. As I said at the very beginning of our conversation, drawing on British Muslim community insight, looking at what's happening on the local level, and then taking that to the people who can actually bring about change on a national policy level for all of us.
Sure, sure. Where do you hope Equi will get to in the next 5 years?
In the next 5 years? So we've done a lot of work in the last just over 1 year to build a team, to bring the right people together. Actually more than a year, because there's already a lot of work that happened before the official launch in September last year. But since then, a lot of work has gone into building the team, starting to publish reports. So in 2024, in the 3 months since the launch of Equi back then, the organization published 3 reports. Now, just a year and 2 months later, less than that, a year and a month and a half later, we've published 8 reports. So we have a very ambitious agenda in terms of publications. In terms of policy engagement, you've seen similar increase. We had a closed engagement table at the Labour Party conference in 2024. This year at the Labour Party conference, we went above and beyond that and hosted a reception that was attended by 120 people, including several MPs. And we had the Home Secretary and the Secretary for Health both give keynote speeches, which is pretty unheard of for a small fringe event of an organization that's only been around for a bit less than a year. So we definitely plan to continue building on that success, inshallah. Speaking about the research side of things in particular, because that's the main focus of my work at Equi, we have exciting reports in the pipeline. There's actually a few more coming out this year. It might feel like the year is almost over, definitely not for Equi. And then, we're planning also to take that motivation and that pace into the new year, inshallah. If you look back at the reports that we published since September 2024, you can see that we cover a really broad range of different topics. The first report looked at British Muslim contributions to the arts and culture. We then published a report on economic contributions of Muslims to the UK economy, but also the risk of exodus due to racism and Islamophobia. I mentioned some of the other reports already. We have the alcohol report, youth violence report, loneliness report. That's just a few examples. But the one thing that they all have in common is it's a really broad range of different topics. So we plan to continue that. And the one thing that holds all of these publications as a broader research plan together is this focus on drawing on British Muslim insights to take policy recommendations to government. So the plan is to continue in that line, inshallah, and take Equi into the new year and beyond that.
Are you allowed to say or just give any examples of what people can look forward to in terms of what's upcoming, or you can't spoil the surprise?
We have reports on a number of key issues coming up. So, for example, a key debate at the moment, really in the last couple of months, at least since the summer, and at least it's probably a debate that goes way beyond that, is immigration. So we've been thinking about how can we address this topic and how can we add our Equi perspective to debates on this topic. So I'm not making any promises, but this might be something that's up coming.
Sure. Great. And just on a personal level, just to finish, how does this role, I mean, you've been in research for a long time. You described yourself as a nerd earlier. It sounds as though, research is in your blood, in your DNA. How does this role, just on a very personal level, your own experience of this role, how does it compare or, differ perhaps to previous roles that you've had?
Yeah, it's an interesting question and one that I've thought a lot about in the last 6 months since I joined Equi. So I'm not even sure I would say that research is in my DNA or my blood or anything like
Fine.
that.
Maybe that was an assumption on my behalf, so forgive me. Well, how come you fell into this rabbit hole then?
So it's really interesting because I actually started off working for non-profit organizations, mostly for NGOs. And I worked a lot abroad. I worked in the Middle East. I worked in different parts of Europe, including the Balkans. I worked in South Asia. I had really good biryani in Pakistan. And then eventually I came to UK. Thought I just wanted to quickly go back to academia to do a master's, and then ended up getting hooked in by the research. I started getting the flavor of it and was so excited by it that I thought, I want to do more of that. I went on to do a PhD, still continued doing consultancies with NGOs and civil society organizations, but still had the plan to go back to the NGO work after the PhD. That was still the plan until halfway through. And I was like, oh my God, I love research so much. I really want to stay. I really want to continue doing that. And building a career in academia is really, really tricky. It's not straightforward. It's not easy. All the academics amongst your listeners, they will they will be able to relate to that. And I tried really hard for some time after the PhD. And eventually I got to a stage where I was like, no, I just can't afford continuing like that. It's too exhausting and it's too financially unstable for someone with a family. So then I came across the NGO research world. And that's when I thought I left academia. I didn't leave academia because you never really leave academia. They have a way of always pulling you back in for small gigs. But really in the last 6 or 7 years, I've been working in NGO research and really came to love that work because it felt like it allowed me to combine my love for research with this experience of working with NGOs and non-profit organizations. And for a long time, I didn't want to work on faith because it felt so cliche, right? The hijabi working on faith. It's like, oh, no, no, no. But of course, I ended up there anyway because, well, people come to you for it. And then you also see that if we don't engage and if we don't tell our story, someone else does it for us. And frankly, I prefer being in that space myself and shaping discussions about me and my people and our future myself. So yeah, that's been the last 6 years or so. A lot of my work in that time has focused on international contexts. So the North America, different parts of Europe, Middle East, Asia, East Africa, Southeast Asia. But I've always continued to do work in the UK as well. There's always been a focus on work in the UK, also on grassroots level with very small community organizations in my area. And then this opportunity at Equi just came up, and yeah, that's how I ended up doing this
And
work.
have you led research teams before, or is this your first sort of leadership role?
No, I have before.
Yeah.
I have before in a number of different contexts for a humanitarian organization here in the UK, and then for an evidence and research organization that's that operated globally but was registered in North America.
And lastly, anybody who's listening who either they're sort of mid-career and might, just interested in getting into research, or a young person who actually wants to, is considering this as a career path. What are your sort of top tips or any advice that you have for people who want to get into research?
I'll have top tips for everyone, not just people who want to get into research, also people who might be interested in working in with NGOs or with think tanks, because I actually think the skill set is often very similar. And I'm saying this specifically with the UK context in mind. So something that's really going to make you stand out in the UK is if you speak other languages. So invest in that, right? And do a little bit of research on the sectors that you're interested in. Or if you're interested in research, then think about like academic research. Think about what topics you want to explore, and then what languages would be helpful in the humanitarian development NGO space, which I've worked in for several years. Languages that are useful are often French, Arabic. So, and it's going to make you stand out. I mean, in Germany, it's quite normal to study 2 foreign languages at a secondary level. It's standard, really. And to actually speak 2 foreign languages at a fairly confident level when you do the equivalent of your A levels. So when I came to the UK, I was superstar in terms of my languages. Right? So that's something I would focus on. And then the other thing is to get experience as soon as possible. And that
is that easy nowadays?
Yeah, I think so. It doesn't have. So I was just going to say that it doesn't have to be work experience. So first of all, it's also grow a thick skin. I've seen this a lot with when I was head of research at a humanitarian organization here in the UK. So I had a lot of mentees who were interns or trainees or early career professionals who worked in my team, and a lot of them were really disheartened because they had done all of these amazing studies and they still didn't get the jobs that they had that they were hoping for. They were writing so many applications. They found it really, really disheartening and took it personal. But I told them that every single person that I've seen in the same situation, it might take a year, sometimes even 2, but eventually you will get there. And in the meantime, what I would recommend for people to do is to try and build your experience in whatever small ways you can do. And I know everyone doesn't have the privilege of doing unpaid internships and traineeships, which is often one way into the door. But you can do whatever you need to do to pay bills. You can have whatever job you want to do, as long as you do something else that you can then put on your CV on the side. So that could be maybe an internship that is only 1 day a week, or it could be a little bit of volunteering. And you can then put that on your CV and you build that, you build the experience, but you also build relationship with different organizations. And having been on the other side of recruitment and selection panels now for a couple of years, I know that organizations, they often like to hire someone who they've already worked with, who they already have a relationship with. And this could be as a volunteer or as a consultant, and so on.
Presumably, this is an area where people can actually, you can get on and do things independently, right? Because I mean, you could just start researching stuff, sharing findings, even if you can't necessarily get the specific roles or the specific jobs. Or is that not an advisable?
I think it depends on the approach. I think it can work, but you need to be quite good at it. So make sure you get feedback from people in the field.
Sure.
It's a bit, I feel like doing a podcast. It can work really well if you know what you're doing, but it can also be a bit embarrassing if it's not that great, you know?
Yeah.
I often think that also when I see social media profiles, and I actually did, again, this goes back to when I was leading the team in that humanitarian organization. I did social media training with my team, and we spoke about how they can specifically use social media for their careers, to advance their careers. So one of the first things I did was, let's have a look at your LinkedIn profile. How do you present yourself to the world? Let's look at your presence on Twitter, Instagram, wherever. And let's always bear in mind that potential employers are going to see that. And if you want to do research and share that, I mean, the first thing I can think of is social media, is maybe a podcast. It could also be a website. But then how do you, what is your USP? What is the added value that you're offering? And there is possible answers for that. It could be that you say, I'm the voice from the community, or maybe you have a specific perspective that no one else has. I don't know, my daughter at the moment, her favorite pop singer is what is he? He's half American and half Japanese, something like that. That's a very specific perspective. So if things don't turn out quite as expected with his pop career, this would be really interesting to do research in something. Maybe you have a similar background, right? Is there something like what is already being done, and what can you then share? And then make sure that if you use social media, I mean, there's nothing worse than a Twitter or Facebook profile that you have set up in order to engage and to disseminate your work, and then you only update it every 2 weeks. That just doesn't look good, right? So you need to have high quality work, and then you need to be consistent with it. And yeah, probably a good idea also to get outside perspectives. Get feedback, speak with people.
Perfect. No, thank you so much. That was, I think, very useful advice and input. And thank you just for the overall conversation. It's been really useful, really nice talking to you. I think we could make this sort of maybe a half-yearly fixture where we, go over all the latest that you and the team have been up to. But fantastic work, and yeah, please do keep it up. I certainly encourage people to support the work as well. Yeah, go on. Sorry.
Thank you. I was just going to say, we have 10 more people on the team. I'm more than happy to send you.
Sure. Yeah, you can.
One of them, but monthly. We should make this a monthly thing.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, we'll see what we can do. We'll see what we can do. No, but thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And definitely encourage everyone to check out Equi. Hopefully, I don't know if there's like a mailing list or something that people can just so they can keep up to date with the the latest. But yeah, all the best with the your future plans and the work. And I pray it goes from strength to strength.
I mean, thank you so much. So people can actually sign up to the mailing list on the website. We are also on LinkedIn, where we regularly post updates, and on Facebook as well. So there's lots of ways to be in touch, and we always love to hear from people. So just send us an email, be in touch. We'd love to hear from you.
Great. Now I'll include all the links for people to find you. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.